I had the pleasure of introducing our project Shaping San Francisco here pretty much exactly 20 years ago, if I remember correctly, when we rolled out our very first version of it on a CD-ROM, and actually we had a public kiosk. Anybody use our public kiosk, the old Shaping San Francisco public kiosk? One or two people. Just across from this room, actually, right down here in the lobby. It was there for 10 straight years. We actually have incredible digital records from all the uses made of it during that time. We have no idea who used it, but we know exactly which screens they went to and what they looked at and all that kind of data. So if anybody wanted to crunch that data, it's available. We have it on about maybe a dozen different public kiosks around town for anywhere from 1 to 10 years worth of material. And it's an example of kind of one of the issues that you have doing these projects is you gather so much stuff. It's so difficult to figure out what's useful, where do you want to spend your time, where do you want to spend your resources. Our project, Shaping San Francisco, I'm Chris Carlsson, started as a vision of, actually in the mid-90s. Any of you who were around during that time will remember that was the period where there was a crazy buzz in town about interactive multimedia. It was going to change everything. It was the end of TV and radio and magazines and newspapers and books. All of it was going to be delivered on CD-ROMs. And so we didn't believe that, but we did see that there was something new coming along. And I had made a living for many years as a typesetter. And I had done an underground magazine in San Francisco throughout the 1980s called Processed World. And so we had a sense of kind of commitment to this problem that we encountered as we were distributing magazines on the streets of the financial district, which was amnesia. We live in a completely amnesiac culture that actually hates history for the most part. It uses the word history as an epithet to tell you that you're irrelevant. Oh, that's history, you're history, pal. So that was a very odd sort of context for us to sort of live in and realize the degradation associated with that. So what we started to do in the mid-90s, after the magazine had sort of reached its logical demise, was to envision this new project, which at the time, again, if you were around during that period and you were touching a computer at that point, you would probably encountered either Myst, one very popular video game at the time, or a computer game, or SimCity, the ability to simulate building cities, and it was a whole interesting game. So we started out as a game project, the three of us in my office, which is over right here at 7th and Market at the Grant Building, turning into a luxury hotel now. And the vision of the project was essentially to be, we called it Wheels at first. We were all bicyclists, and we had come from being very involved with critical mass and very involved with trying to challenge the paradigms of the organization of urban America through our choice to ride a bike every day. And so one of the guys was a former bike messenger. So the premise of the game was you were a bike messenger, you went down the hall, you had made a pickup, you're in the elevator, and then the next big earthquake strikes. And we did this whole animation on the computer, you're shaking, and the doors finally open, and you've been knocked into the past. And you have to find your way back to the present by solving historical problems. Seems like a great idea at the first thought. And we spent 18 months with that great idea and realized it was really stupid. So we threw it away. And part of the reason we threw it away was because as we were assembling these questions that you had to solve, we kind of learned more and more about local history. So we really backed into the history. Like, we weren't starting off as a history project per se. I mean, it was about attacking amnesia, but to do it in a kind of clever way using this new technology. And it wasn't about the interactivity that happens between you and the box, you and the computer. That's not interactivity. That's glorified multiple choice in a box. It still is to this very day. But what we hoped to do by creating a series of public kiosks around the city was to create a mechanism by which you'd be sitting looking at this thing, perhaps right across from this room, and somebody else would come up behind you and go, "What are you doing? What is that thing?" And you'd get into a conversation about it. And that was the interactivity we're interested in. We're kind of using it as the technology as a Trojan horse to get people to talk to each other. Because obviously we live in a society in which public space and public conversation is in serious demise. So that was the sort of the political impetus for this project. It was a political impetus. It was to actually challenge an amnesiac culture and to do it using the new technology in a way that wasn't about glorifying the technology or even promoting it per se, but using it to actually promote the most basic thing, get people to talk with each other and hopefully argue with each other about how in the hell did the world get like this? How did San Francisco become the way it is? And that was really the driving passion of the project ever since, was to try to uncover that. And in that respect, we're in the river with a lot of other really interesting history work and history projects. And as we've gone along from our opening in '98 to the present, we've changed how we do it. We've changed our technology base, and I'm going to show you some of that in a moment. But we've also found many companions have joined us along the way. Many local history projects have emerged in San Francisco, neighborhood by neighborhood. The Western Neighborhoods Project, good example, Bernal Heights, Potrero Hill, Visitation Valley, et cetera. So a lot of people have started to go into these micro-histories of where they live and learning about the place. And that's very much what we were interested in doing as well. But we were also interested in committing to the public record our lived experiences in social movements. Because a great deal of history that you read about is always the history of great men, right? The whole thread, the whole sort of trajectory of popular history for a very long time has been about the generals and the politicians and the businessmen, and they did it all, while the rest of us are just kind of, the blank cast in the background. And since the 60s, that's been challenged pretty heavily. There's been a whole new movement within history. It's not so new anymore, it's 50 years old. But it even has much earlier roots going back to the 30s and even earlier, but especially in the 30s with the Annales School in France, that looked at sort of the everyday life as the foundation of history. How did people actually live? What was the food they ate, the clothes they wore, the social relationships that they constructed? And that it's a construction. It's a social phenomenon that we make history together, we make lives together. And how do we begin to unpack that and look back through the whole thread of history to understand that better? And so that was sort of our inspiration for doing this project, in some respect, other than what I already explained, was to be part of that thread that said history, really what's interesting about history is history from below. The history of everyday life, the history of the voices that are lost and forgotten, and to some extent suppressed. And so in that light, I do want to just give you a quick quote that I used when we did this at the History Days, which is a really interesting book, if you haven't seen it, from a Haitian scholar named Michel Rolph Trouillot, and the book is called Silencing the Past. And it's a fascinating look at sort of historiography and how we understand the past. So where do we get our information from? What do we take seriously about sources and records? And what we really learn as we think about it for just a short time is that most of what is back there has been silenced. It's forgotten, it's left out, it's not been collected. And so I love some of the stuff that you guys are talking about, because it's all about trying to really resituate the choices that we make ethically and historically about what we collect or don't collect, and once having collected it, how do we make available, what kind of access does it have, et cetera. So to help you think about that better, here's a short quote from Michel Rolph Trouillot. "Silences enter the process of historical production at 4 crucial moments: the moment of fact creation, the making of sources; the moment of fact assembly, the making of archives; the moment of fact retrieval, the making of narratives; and the moment of retrospective significance, the making of history in the final instance." And so that's something that we kind of tend to overlook. So a lot of what we take sort of give credibility to historically are people's serious works, the books that they've written. Now we have more and more archives online that we can use as material to build stories from. But the question of building the narrative arc that makes sense to us, how do we know that the starting point of that, the knowing of the world back then, is even relevant to us today? And that's a point of where our motto about our project is that history is a creative act in the present. That doesn't mean we make it up. It means we're arguing about it now. We have to rethink it all the time. There's constantly new information appearing, thanks to all the great archival work that's starting to appear, and the fact that people are producing archives to look at and use instead of just having them buried in dusty file cabinets, et cetera. And it requires all of us to be creatively engaged with knowing and understanding that past, and to think critically about somebody who spends their whole discussion citing the Chronicle from the 1870s or something like that, which was famously a scandal sheet that had very little to do with truth. And then truth itself is a subject of discussion and debate. Not to say there's not such a thing as truth, there is. But it's something that it's a moving target. It's not a fixed truth that sits solidly, capital T, forever and ever from time immemorial to the present. No, it's something that we're constantly having to reevaluate. And that's something we do today when we make history together. Like today, we're in this room together. We're actually making history. We probably didn't think that on the way here, but it's actually part of the process. So our project then sort of serves multiple purposes. It started as this very grassrootsy thing. There's several, I'm going to show you this. There's 2 big websites, shapingsf.org, and this is the home screen of that. And we have a collection on here. There's public talks as part of what we do. We do tours, walking tours through the city. There's some more coming up soon. A bicycle tour coming up next weekend about birding. If you're a bicyclist and you want to do birds. 80 to 100 species of birds in 5 hours as we go around from Crissy Field over to or Fort Mason all the way up to the Cliff House by way of Golden Gate Park. So this is part of the project that we have, is not only to have collected all this material over time, starting, as I said, in the early 90s, but to take it to the present. We have an archive online at foundsf.org, which I'll show you in a second, and then we do all this public programming, because part of the big mission for us is to not treat history as something that's just behind us, that you can go and access it through a file cabinet, but that we actually make history all the time together. So we do this in public discussions that we have at our site over at 518 Valencia on Wednesday nights. We have recorded most of those for the last 12 years, so you can go to our Shaping SF back screens here. Let me just show you some of these things quickly so you'll know where they are. So here's FoundSF, the home screen of FoundSF, and we're going to visit some of the content on here. And I'll give you a quick vision on how it works and how you can use it. But there's 1,850 screens on here of material, and they're divided up into all these keyword categories: neighborhoods, populations, themes, and decades, so you can sort of find your way navigating that way. Or you can just wander through it, browsing at random, and then we're going to talk about some of the problems with that. But this is an article that I wrote pretty recently for a book, and we put it in here already, backing into a history commons, which is kind of what we did. We created a history commons. You're all invited to consider yourselves historians and to contribute your experiences of living and going through things here in San Francisco, or perhaps you have a box of old photographs from your grandmother or diaries or something like that that you think are should be part of the historical record, and for the most part nobody's interested. They don't think, well, why would you think that? Well, because it was my grandmother and it's interesting, and here's the stuff that's really juicy. Well, you can put that into FoundSF. It's an open living archive of the city, and it's open to everybody. And for some of the questions that just came up about the ethics of these things, we don't actually broach that very carefully. Like, we're open to people putting stuff in. If somebody came in with some, crackpot racist version of history, we'd probably balk at it. But it's never happened. For the most part, people want to tell the stories that they've lived through, and they're very interesting stories. And a lot of the stuff we get, I curate. I go out and seek chapters from books, or I've written articles myself, or I find other people that are doing interesting histories, and we ask them, will you contribute it? Because for the most part, people, and this happened from the earliest days 20 years ago, you ask people, you say, look, you too can be a historian. You could write something for us. They go, well, I don't write. Or I write, but I don't write history. I'm not really I'm not a professional historian. And our project was founded on the notion that you don't have to be to make an important contribution to the historical record. You do not have to be a professional historian. Now, there's professional historians who are going to hate me for saying that, of course, because they want to have the gates are up and you have to be on the inside with the PhD or you don't get to play. Well, I mean, I'm a good example that that's not necessary. I dropped out of college in 1979. I never even got a BA. I've got 9 books in print, and I've done this project for 20-some years, and you don't have to go through the normal channels to do these things. You do not. And so we like to encourage people to think differently about these things. So that's part of the gang that started it. There I am, a bit younger. And just for fun, I'll show you. This is back in the day when we were selling magazines on the streets. I was walking around in a Milk of Amnesia milk can. So sometimes you'll just do about anything to change the world. So the past talks we have here, or this is the upcoming talks on our talk series. We still have a few things. There's one that you might be interested in particular. On May 23rd, Archives and Memory, New Ways of Making History. So this exact conversation will come up in a new way from the people that will be there that night, including Susan from the library and Rick Pralinger and Howard Besser. Keeping moving. We do have archives of our past talks. So just this past week, we did Saving the Bay from the Future. How many ever heard of the Reber Plan? John Reber has spent the better part of 25 years trying to convince San Francisco Bay Area that we should build giant earthen dams, one just south of where the Bay Bridge is and one about where the Richmond Bridge is. And that would create 2 freshwater lakes and unlimited supplies of fresh water for California. And he got really close to convincing everybody to do it around 1949, 1950. It almost started, he got support in the US Senate, money was being allocated. And luckily, by the late 50s, the Army Corps of Engineers got involved to try to analyze it, and they built the Bay model, which you can still visit over there in Sausalito. And it showed that this was a really crackpot idea. To us today, it's self-evidently crackpot. But those, for the good part of the middle of the 20th century, giant engineering projects had the hubris to imagine that they could re-engineer nature and it would be for the good. And now we know much better that nature bats last, and you better get out of the way if you're going to carry on in the world. So anyway, we have a lot of other stuff going back for the last year. These are all the recent ones that we've had, various talks with artists and photographers and mappers and different neighborhoods, et cetera. So you can check that out at your convenience. We also do the tours, so there's all these walking tours and bike tours as a way of going out and peeling back the layers of history and locations. We're just about to start a new podcast, and that's exactly the idea, is we're going to go to a specific spot and peel back the layers of history. That turns out to be many layers of history in many locations around town. So once you go out on a walking tour with us or a bike tour, you really can't see the city the same way again. It's just not possible. On we go. So we have some books that we've done, and we have special projects that we've done. And these special projects, we're doing currently a scanning project. The library's collaborated with us a little bit on this, but it's happening out at the Internet Archive, which is to take all the community newspapers, going back as basically starting mostly in the mid-60s and on to the present, some of them ended a long time ago, and putting them online at the Internet Archive for free. So this ends up being this incredible resource if you're doing local historical investigations into the daily life of San Francisco, going back the last half century, is this remarkable collection of newspapers, and you can get there from here. We have our project Unsettlers, is a friend of my wife, actually, who's been working on this project about the Mission District. She's currently writing a series of articles in El Tecolote about the Mission District and its histories. We did a couple of different walking tours that we tried to use this essentially the new technologies of QR codes and plaques, where we put them up around town. And so there was one that we did between two murals, bending over backwards from 8th and Harrison to 16th and Valencia. And we also published this book. We did 3 books since the beginning of the project. First one was Reclaiming San Francisco, History, Politics, and Culture with City Lights. The Political Edge in 2004, also with City Lights. And finally with City Lights, 10 Years That Shook the City, San Francisco, 1968 to 78, came out in 2011. And that one we created a 24-stop audio walking tour where you had excerpts from all the essays and the authors, in the author's own voice for the most part. And you could go through San Francisco, most of them were in the Mission, as it turned out. And then you could actually play the little audio clips as you got to the spots. You hit it with your phone, it brings up the playable file, et cetera. So we've tried all that stuff. It turns out not very many people use it. So we kind of always find ourselves ahead of the curve, creating things that we think the world wants. And then it turns out, whatever, we don't really care. And so it's an experiment. It's a constant experiment to use the new technologies that are out there to bring history to the public and find out how much is there in the public that's interested. I mean, another little side story that's kind of funny for some of you might enjoy. In the late 90s, I saw that Next computer on your slideshow, which cracked me up, because that was the period of time when we were starting, it was the mid-90s, and we were convinced that the Macintosh was done. Like, it was just done. There was no chance of that having a future because it had dwindled to less than 3% of the market. And yeah, everybody just sort of was writing off Apple at that point. And so we did too. And we spent all our money buying a really fancy 386 computer with a whopping 500 megabyte hard drive. And we were really pleased about that. And we thought, okay, now here we go. We can start creating this project. And we did, and we finally got it long, complicated thousands of hours of work for free. And we got it out and put it into a CD-ROM and public kiosks. And the CD-ROM only ran on a Windows computer. And so it turns out, who knew, but at that point, around 98, 99, when we were selling CD-ROMs, that of the people in San Francisco Bay Area interested in history, out of the whole population, pretty small number, maybe 10%, 20 maybe at the most, but probably more like 10. And then of the number of people who are interested in history and would touch a computer in 1998, 99, that's a really tiny number of people. And of that number of people, fully 50% were religiously committed to the Macintosh and thought we were working with Satan because we were on a Windows platform. And you may recall the stupidity of that argument that went on for so long. So that kind of shot ourselves in the foot without knowing it at the time, and there was no way we could have really anticipated that. Besides which, we didn't have the money. Everything Apple was expensive, to more than double the price. But these are the kind of things you face when you're doing technology projects. And finally, in 2001, our Windows version was second edition, which was better than the first by far. And we were doing sort of selling CDs at a brisk clip that helped pay the rent. Didn't do anything more than that. Windows came out with their new operating system, XP, and our project just stopped. It went blank because there was some change under the hood. And it turned out the company whose software we had chosen to use stopped supporting it. And so this is the problem of proprietary software. You have to be prepared for that. And so for a lot of people, for many years now, we've all gone towards open source and free public access, free software where we can get it. And really important when you're doing a public history project to get off of proprietary software and never look at it again, because it's never going to be your friend. They will act like, oh, we've got the best bells and whistles ever, you got to use our stuff, and then 5 years later they've moved on and you're stuck with it. So this is a problem that we've all faced. We're all on older platforms at different moments. Our current site, FoundSF, is on MediaWiki, which is it's the same software that underlies Wikipedia. And of course, we have a very different philosophy of history than Wikipedia. Wikipedia says you can't put anything on there unless it has 3 other places online already to verify it, and that you have to maintain a so-called neutral point of view, whatever that is. And these are just things that we just reject out of hand. It's like the vast majority of interesting histories are not online. And they're not going to be online unless we put them there. So that would be a silly rule to agree to. And then, of course, the idea of neutrality is just, I'm all for trying to look at the full scope of the interesting information in front of you and not be, come into it with a super heavy ideological bias that eliminates facts that are in front of you or interesting points of view. But on the other hand, the notion that anybody could be neutral about anything is, to me, laughable. You could try to strive for some objective tone, but you're making choices, editorial choices, that make some things valuable and other things not, and leave some things out and put some things in. That's super highly loaded series of decisions, whether you think it is or not. So we've been on that platform for a while, and we're wondering what to do next. I wanted to show you a couple more things here. These are examples. We did this huge special project called Ecology Emergence, where we went out and interviewed all these different people, about 30 different people almost, about the sort of arc of the movement from conservation in the late 50s all the way to ecological and social justice in the present time. And we found people of different ages and situations, and we're working in different capacities in the environmental movement over the years. And we created a few of these short video clips here, and then you can go and basically see those raw interviews from anybody that you want. We put all of our video captures and our audios, all of them are online at the Internet Archive under the Shaping San Francisco channel. And so all of those are available to you to use for research. We put them into the public domain. We think that's really what needs to happen with history, is that for the vast majority of it, it shouldn't be owned. It's immoral to say that, like for instance, the Bettman Archive that Bill Gates owns, just pisses me off in Corbis, because they've taken some of the greatest photography of the 20th century and turned it into a product for sale. And this is just wrong. This is our shared heritage. This should be something that's automatically in the public domain that we can all use. And so we've actually done a lot of work with photography, thanks to the public library, who's been very generous with us, as well as other archives in the San Francisco area, which have all opened up a lot in the since we started this project. When we started, it was difficult. And the library was friendly, but everybody else was really difficult to work with. And you had to get all these, jump through a lot of hoops and sign a lot of documents and so on. And now it's just way easier. But the problem of it being so much easier is not only easier for us, it's easier for everybody. So even in a case of our site, we're being scraped all the time by Facebook groups who just constantly grab everything they can get and throw it online as though they just invented it or discovered it, and don't source it and don't tell you anything about anything that it might tell you about it, except to just guess about it. And so it's very frustrating to see that happen, but I understand that that's part of the deal. We've kind of made that work for each other. So these tours that we have, you can go from stop to stop on this page on bending over backwards, and there's a playable file for each of these spots where you can hear something about the local history that happened, and that's the route. So that's one this is one's on shapingsf.org. So one of our problems in our odd project is we do have these two websites. One is foundsf.org and one is shapingsf, and the Shaping SF has sort of this collection of stuff that we didn't find another home for on our digital archive yet. It needs to be compiled and put over there, but it's one of these odd problems that we ended up with, and that's because we were in for a little while, a cooperative agreement with the Museum and Historical Society when they were going to be taking over the old Mint. And then at one point we agreed to have our project be part of that system, and so we created, when we were just about to roll out our new website, foundsf.org, we renamed it FoundSF instead of Shaping SF, because they were going to be co-sponsors, and then after 2 years they reneged on that deal, and so we're now stuck with double branding, as we have been on several times. That's what our plaques look like. There are a number of them around town, still a few of them lurking around that have to do with the tour that you get from the 10 years tour. Now this tour is integrated into FoundSF, so for instance, you go here, if you go to the top of this screen, if you hit tours, you'd end up on this screen right here. And then there's all these different tours that you could take: a water tour, shoreline, historic habitat, transit history, labor, food, etc. But then the one that has to do with our book is the 10 Years That Shook the City tour. And so then here you could go to any given screen in this whole situation and then find out about, for instance, the fact that in the late 70s, the Sandinistas, the ones who created the revolution in Nicaragua, were all living in the Mission District. Some of them were pumping gas at the Shell station at 21st and South Van Ness. And it's an incredible story to realize that that had a really big impact on world history. And one of the reasons that the Sandinista revolution was not homophobic in the way that the Castro revolution was in Cuba was because a lot of those guys had been living in San Francisco during the big gay liberation movement of the 70s and had huge solidarity from left-wing gay activists, most of whom died in the AIDS period. So these bits of history are quite lost to us now, but they're parts of what we try to include here on our website. Finally, I'm just going to give you a quick look at a couple of screens on here. I'll show you, this is Bloody Thursday. Some of you will know what that is. It was July 5th, 1934. There had been a waterfront strike going on already for 2 months at that point, and it was fairly, under control in the sense it wasn't open violence. Yeah, the open violence came on July 3rd, 2 days before this, when the owners of the shipping lines decided that labor was licked because they were tired and hungry and had been on strike for 2 months with no support. And they were going to break open that strike by bringing in scabs and strike breakers and roll a train out of Pier 38, which led to a day-long riot with all this tear gas blowing up all over town because there was these two competing tear gas salesmen in town who were giving free samples to the police. Oh, please shoot mine. No, shoot mine. And one guy even shot it himself, which later became kind of a complicated story to unpack. But anyway, 4th of July followed that holiday. People mostly laid low. And then July 5th, 1934 was Bloody Thursday. And so, as you can see, just I'll flag it before we play the video, there's these categories on the side, which have to do with the categories under theme or neighborhood or decade. So labor, the 1930s, South of Market, 34 General Strike, the Longshoremen's Union, downtown and dissent. And then there's a page that says, what links here? And I'll show you that on a later screen, but just to sort of bring it to your attention, it's a way for you to navigate through the site as you're inside of Found SF. So here's a short clip that we get from the Prelinger archive.
Efforts of business interests to forcibly open the strike-paralyzed port of San Francisco failed. Open warfare rages through the streets of the city as 3,000 Union pickets battle 700 police. Guns, tear gas, clubs, and fists bring injuries to more than 80 persons and cause the death of 2. Listen to the strikers' side of the story.
We are asking for a general strike to keep organized labor on the Pacific Coast. We are not only asking for it, but we're going to get it.
Then, with a general strike and additional violence threatened, 2,500 guardsmen move in, commanded by Colonel Mittelstaedt.
The California National Guard has been ordered into active service by our governor for the purpose of maintaining law and order in San Francisco and protecting life and property. This we propose to do at any cost.
These idle ships and piers have more than local significance. They are symbols of wasted millions and represent a backward step in our recovery program.
Not biased at all. And so then that's one example of the kind of stuff that we've embedded in the site. A lot of our archival footage, mostly thanks to Rick Prelinger's amazing collection that he has fully digitized now almost entirely and put it online. And he had gotten at one point 80,000 cans of film from Burt Gould, the Path photographer. That was a lot of it was outtakes and footage that nobody's seen. They've also put online dozens and dozens of industrials and outtakes from Hollywood films. And if you haven't been to the Lost Landscape show, you have to check that out at the Castro every December, two nights now, standing room only crowds. It's crazy how big it got. That started at our talk series. The Lost Landscape show was originally part of Shaping San Francisco talks, and then he did it for us. Did it the second year, and it was so crowded they realized, well, we better move to a bigger venue. And then since then, it's moved to the Castro, and now it's 11 years later, and it's like this mega event every year for the Long Now Foundation. But anyway, so that's one example. We also done our own collection of oral histories and we don't have vast numbers of them, but we do have some really interesting ones. And so here's a clip from a guy named Harry Hay, who happened to be here during the general strike. Go ahead and tell us who you are and something about your experiences here in the 30s.
Well, my name is Harry Hay, and in the early 30s, I was among other things, an actor. And working as an actor, I was working in I had been working as an understudy for a repertory theater in Hollywood, known as the Hollywood Theater Players at the Hollywood Playhouse. Harry Bridges had been speaking, and there was a whole sort of a general feeling that you had a feeling that something was about to break, something was about to happen. It was a stalemate, as you know, between the unions and the bosses on the other side. We hadn't made a breakthrough yet, but it was a lot tense. It was a time of confrontation, and this is, I guess, when the governor called out the militia, and the militia were there, and we could see them. And they had been firing indiscriminately into the crowd just to get people nervous and upset. And Bill and I, as a matter of fact, were on our way. You know what would happen? You have a large milling crowd. If you're going to say move from here to here, you have to move with this particular group of people who are moving in that direction, and find a way to cut across it to get over to a certain area. And we were in the process of doing that, when all of a sudden a bullet went right past my ear. And I wasn't able to turn back to see what happened, but I could hear from the crowd behind us somebody had been hit and somebody had been shot. And the whole crowd changed. I mean, the feeling, the whole dynamics, the whole thing had changed completely, because we'd have been fired upon, we'd been hurt, somebody was hurt. All of a sudden, this is going to have to be a confrontation that has to be resolved.
So that's, his interesting account of being here. And then, you don't probably know who he is, unless you do, but most people don't, and he's now passed away. But there's a click here that you could take over to who he was, which I've already opened it up. There he is as a young man. He was one of the founders of the Mattachine Society, the very first gay rights organization. And actually some of his inspiration for doing that was that he was a Stalinist. And that Stalin had done all this stuff in the 30s about promoting the idea of national identities and national territories within the Soviet Union, and the dedicated communists of the United States were like, that's a good idea. And then Harry's, who's hanging out with all of his other friends, thinking, well, we're kind of a people, maybe we should have a place, and we should have at least an organization, a political organization for ourselves. And so I'll let you come here on your own later if you want to, but you can hear him talking for 6 minutes about the fact that there's no word yet for being gay in the 1930s. They actually called themselves degenerate heterosexuals, or on a good day, temperamental. And so, these are the kind of things that we don't really have a great grasp of, and all the thousands of men who are subjected to, frontal lobotomies or electroshock and all the different ways they were supposedly going to be cured during the 40s and 50s, and that legacy and being in the closet, and why that was just like the obvious thing to be for a long time. But being in the closet meant being blackmailed for yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. Right. And then linkages. So having said that, I was going to show you that one of the navigational tools here. So there's gay and lesbian, which we probably should rename that category. That's from the 90s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And then what links here? So you click on that, and it shows you all the other screens that have a link into this screen, or that this links out to. And that can be handy for you if you're just trying to look for related materials. But this broaches the topic that I think is one of the interesting things to discuss, which is this curious idea that was part of actually being floated in the 90s when we were started out on this project, which was that authorial voices were not going to be the key anymore. It was going to be the reader. The reader was the writer. And the reader was writing by going through their navigational experience, clicking through on hyperlinks. Now we take it all for granted on the internet, but in the 90s that was still kind of like, what's a hyperlink? How does that work, But it basically means moving horizontally or diagonally through material at your whim. Nowadays on the internet, everybody does it all day long and don't think twice about it. But the question is that a writing experience? I would say for sure not. But in the 90s, that was commonly understood to be a real possibility, and it was a debate that was going on. And so as we created this project, that was part of what we were trying to imagine, is like, are we actually going to make it possible for readers to be the writers by doing these things, by hopping through all this material? And any one of these topic areas, here's our theme sub-menus. So all these are topics that have anywhere from 5 to 25 to maybe sometimes 150 screens that have been tagged with these categories. Same thing for decades, same thing for populations. And so as you're wandering through it, it's actually a very chaotic experience. It's a very incoherent experience. There's no narrative flow. There couldn't be. However, in any given screen, there might be a full essay that has its own narrative arc that the author spent a lot of time putting together because they composed a full essay that we were then given permission to use, or perhaps I wrote it myself. And so this sort of begs the question of narration and narrative arcs versus this kind of cacophony of online materials that we're all confronted with all the time, and what's the proper relationship between them. Now this brings up an interesting reference that I brought up last time, which is a book that I read recently called Past Imperfect by Peter Charles Hoffer. It's a fascinating book because he was on the American Historical Association's ethics committee in the 90s. And they found, they had 4 major ethical crises in the 90s, which had to do with Doris Kearns Goodwin and Stephen Ambrose, both plagiarizing great amount of material. Stephen Ambrose plagiarized tons of stuff. His books are like fully picked up out of other people's books, and denied it to his death and never did anything about it. Doris Kearns Goodwin copped to it and immediately hired a bunch of grad students to fix all her books. And then this other guy, Bill Isles, who had written a whole book about the history of guns in colonial America to sort of argue that people didn't really have that many guns and there was no real justification for this argument that everybody always was gun happy in the United States. He's trying to basically attack the NRA, but he falsified records. He went and made up all this stuff about what was in the inventories of people's homes and lives in New England in the colonial period, and he got caught. And then another guy, Ellis, who was apparently quite a great historian, but unfortunately, apart from what he actually wrote for history, which was not challenged, he started telling tall tales about his own personal past in his classrooms. So he said he was in Vietnam, and then he came back and he led the anti-Vietnam War movement and did all this stuff, and it's like, no, you didn't. And so he goes through these ethical lapses and tries to come to grips with all that stuff. But while he's doing that, he's also discussing this problem of sort of the structure of history and tells the history of writing history in the United States, which is an extremely useful overview of that. If you wanted to get a look at that, I'd recommend that book, Past Imperfect, because he traces the fact that there was this sort of mythology developed right away about the Founding Fathers and the Constitution and all the stuff that we kind of automatically repeat on autopilot about how great America is, and that was just mostly based on falsehoods, and that now, since half a century later, a lot of that stuff is unraveled. And part of the sort of the challenge to these well-known historians that took place in the 90s contributed to what had already come from below, from all these grassroots historians and new lefty academics who had really attacked the grand narrative of American history and pulled it apart and made it quite evident that it didn't hold up. And that's, between slavery and women and Chinese and so on, all these different stories that had been systematically left out of the historical record really changed how we would understand American history. And so as he goes through all this stuff, it's very, really interesting, useful look at that. And he talks about the fact that the new grassroots or, kind of history from below specialists became the most rigorous historians out there. They write these intense monographs but unfortunately they're written in such a way that nobody will read them unless you're in an academic historical world. And then the other side of it is that you had these super popular history books like Stephen Ambrose and Doris Kearns Goodwin stuff that had a huge mass market that ended up, having some ethical problems about some of it, but there's plenty of books out there that don't have that problem. But what he found is he went into the archives of Amazon and to the comments and tried to figure out, well, which books are really popular and why around history. And his conclusion was that it was the books that had the least footnotes and the least bibliography and least references were the most popular history books. And that the ones that were more serious and done by academic standards were the least popular ones. And it's just a curious thing about where we're at, in terms of our culture and how we want to engage with history. We've kind of discredited the history profession. Some of it was because of the ethical lapses of well-known historians. Some of it's because of the long half-a-century project of undoing this false history that we've congratulated ourselves with for so long. And now we're stuck in this world where historians aren't taken seriously. They're just another opinion in the marketplace of ideas. And there's no real authority associated with historical analyses as there once was. And that's probably for the better, in my opinion, as long as we can do the same thing to the economists and the philosophers and all of them. But it really begs the question of our subjective engagement, our own ability to think critically about what we hear, what we receive, how we ascertain what's a meaningful source, how we learn how to read things in a way that really helps us unpack where that came from, what the biases were, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of want to leave you with that thought as the last thing to think about, is this relationship between the need we have for storytelling and narratives, and then the inability of those narratives to encompass the complexity of history. And so where does that leave us? Sort of this kind of dual world in which we have these wild and very dispersed and somewhat incoherent collections where you have to find them and make the meaning of them as you go through them, which is fine, and or the books that we choose to give a lot of credibility to because we think that the writer really pulled it all together and made a lot of sense to us. So it's a part of what we all do when we're doing history. So some of you are history writers, all of us are interested in history in one way or another. And this is the kind of the task at hand, is to really kind of work the field, work the various possibilities, the digital archives, the paper archives, the things that have been lost, the memories that are very unreliable, but nevertheless very interesting, to bring into a kind of a dialogue with each other, into a kind of a critical contextual relationship that allows us to then make history in a way that makes sense to all of us. So I'll leave it there. Now we're open for Q&A, I guess.